Welcome everybody to our latest webinar. This one today is on CDM, BIM and Design Matters with NEC. Very pleased to welcome Steph Yeadon today, Director of Stradia, who's a BIM specialist, and also Mark Davies, CDM Manager at Mott MacDonald. Welcome to you guys.
Thank you.
Actually, before we start on what we're doing today, just a reminder, of course, those of you that have done this before, perhaps those of you new to it, please do ask questions as we go through the webinar. We'll gather up and answer as many as we possibly can. Those that can't answer, we'll follow up after the webinar itself and give some suggested answers. So, without further ado, what are we doing today? We're going to have particular focus on the NEC3 Professional Services Contract. We're going to look at what is design, what is BIM, and what is CDM. We're going to have a look at how these are included in the scope of the professional services contract, and perhaps what changes have come about to these recently. Also, which NEC contracts are relevant for designers, which ones can designers expect to interact in the world of BIM and CDM. What role does the designer play in NEC3 contracts? Also, why is that important? And finally, providing for design, BIM and CDM in other NEC3 contracts. So we've set ourselves quite a task. In themselves, they're probably good individual webinars, CDM and BIM, but we're trying to sort of bring them together because they definitely interact and sort of spring from each other. Okay, so what do we mean by the word design? And we're going to try and narrow that definition just for today to think about it in terms of designing for the creation of an asset in the built environment at any level of the supply chain. Of course, just as an aside, using the professional services contract and perhaps a professional services short contract can also be used to procure the design of basically anything, a plane, a train, an automobile, even software or a prototype, or literally anything involving design / professional services. Further, it could be used for the procurement of a person or an organisation to give advice, so writing reports on perhaps business improvement, perhaps somebody carrying out an audit, or maybe giving legal advice or accountancy. So very extensive to do with the procurement of professional services, and as last bullet says, any other professional services at all. So if you are a designer, what are the different forms of NEC contract that may come your way? The classic appointment is between somebody called an employer, client if you like, and somebody called a consultant, and they will use the sort of top left orange book contract there, the professional services contract. Sometimes they may sub-consult, sometimes they may just carry out the services themselves. There's an adjudicator top right. Hopefully you never ever fall out and have a dispute and have that heard in adjudication, but that provision is there just in case. So the classic sort of engagement of somebody to provide design is via the professional services contract, directly between somebody called an employer and somebody called a consultant. In the creation of an asset, if you like, in a construction project, then we may be engaging somebody called a contractor, using the ECC typically, and the employer, where it is employer designed contract, is engaging something called a designer, as you can see on the sort of left-hand side, using either the PSC or the PSSC to produce a design for the contractor to build. So in this model, the contractor is basically a builder. He's building whatever the employer has engaged in terms of design from this person called the designer. So that's a typical employer-designed arrangement. Again, the designer could actually be in-house, could be a part of the employer's organisation, or maybe could be a separate consultant, in which case one of the two contracts shown there would be used to engage them. Last model is a typical D&B arrangement, where this time the designer is an arm off the contractor. So now the contractor has single point design and build responsibility as far as the employer is concerned. The contractor, if he has in-house design expertise, could carry that out himself. If not, if he externalises that, he would again use perhaps the PSC or the PSSC to engage an outside firm to procure such design advice. So that's really just a very quick run through of the different sort of contracts that may be used to engage design. And today's purposes, we are thinking design in terms of something in an asset in the built environment. Okay, if I can just hand over to Steph.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Rob. Just to give you a quick rundown on what I'm going to talk about today, just a very brief outline on, if you like, our interpretation of what is BIM. Basically, the intelligent model-based process helping clients and contractors help plan, design, construct and manage buildings and infrastructure. Very strong links in with the government 2025 strategy on the whole purpose of benefit of using and mandating BIM is to get the reduction in cost savings across the whole of construction. Benefits the design team, contractor and client by first building the scheme first in design software. On the drop-down level, clash detection, very easy things to pick up in the first instance of how the buildability can be identified before any turf is broken, and allowing the client team to test the functionality and the integrity of the design in an easy-to-follow 3D format. This is just a quick fly-through and a still shot from a common data platform to show you how, from a client's perspective, once these models are actually picked up and put forward on screen, they can actually then see the viability of how the BIM design has been progressed. See how the clinical staff, this is a hospital waiting room, if I recall, can actually work around the building. Where the industry, and by that I'm mainly implying on here, is the UK industry in implementing BIM. There is a 2016 government directive for major contractors or all contractors to be compliant up to the level of BIM level 2, which I'll talk about in a moment. My experience of working under a tender support environment with most of the major contractors, be them either construction or civil in the UK, is that most of those are already either on compliant or working towards being compliant with that directive. There is some weaknesses, however, should be recognised within the supply chain, and that mainly down to probably lack of investment in training from their side. And I think most of the major contractors are trying to address that as regards collaborative and group training with clients as well.
Do you think, why do we need the government directive? Why don't we just do it anyway? To me, it always seems a blatantly obvious process that we should be using. Why do we wait for somebody to tell us what to do?
Because I think it has been a blatantly obvious directive for people to be doing, but people aren't doing it. Yeah. And to have the necessary requirement in the drop-in construction, that push towards, and this is a very obvious platform, I think, for making sure everybody's working on the same level to a standard, which is, it's hard enough anyway with BIM anyway, because there's so many different software and approaches out there as it is, but it's a common language that everybody's at least trying to work to
try and rationalise, try and standardise.
It is, yeah.
Try, ultimately, to create better outcomes.
Absolutely, completely. As regards BIM level 2, which is the directive, there are 3 levels of BIM maturity that the UK government have prescribed. This is focusing on BIM level 2 as this managed 3D environment using separate BIM tools with data attached, resource planning software, and BIM may utilise at this point, even at BIM level 3, BIM 4D and BIM 5D, which I'll come on and explain about later, but it basically allows you to visualise the point of construction at any one time and the cost of that construction at any one time. Just a quick breakdown, which I'm not going to spend too much time on the breakdown of the level 2 maturity. The public accessible specifications, or if you like the CASs, deal with the capital delivery of construction using BIM and also for the operational phase of assets using BIM. The latter probably being the slower to come up with that compliance with the 2016 directive, because I think that it's normal that the FN and building services team are brought in far later along in the BIM process to actually be involved in the design at the start.
But the logic for that one's always escaped me. I know you got to make government soft landing setting, but why on earth would you wait to the end of the job to start talking to the guys who are going to run it for the next 10, 20 years?
Absolutely, and I think
bizarre to say the least.
It's a very good point actually, Rob, because although government soft landings has been around for some time, and I think most major contractors have embraced that far earlier on than attacking the BIM compliance. And dealing with the whole process of bringing in those estate teams and bringing in those client teams to sort their FM asset data out and how they're going to operate in the future, it's not actually been very well linked in with BIM. Yeah. And I think they've been seen as 2 separate activities. And although GSL is part of the BIM pass-through, to me they're still not a proper joining process in place, in my opinion.
I've seen clients often with their departments, the sort of capital departments and the operating departments, lock horns, you know.
They do.
They may work for one organisation, but they're both trying to get the ear of the board to give them more money than the other.
The problem you've got with that is you've got two different colours of money. You've got the capital investment and you've got the operational budget, which is far more constrained.
But the operational goes on every year indefinitely.
Yeah, forever and a day, and the least you spend today, the more you'll spend tomorrow, probably. Yes. And the interaction that could have on CDM, maybe.
Indeed.
A little bit later. Sorry, sir.
No, that's fine. The only point I want to make on this slide, I think, is to talk about the BIM protocol. The question that Rob and I had a discussion yesterday about was how do we take that, something like a directive for BIM, and interpret it or align it within the NEC contract. And to me, I think the easiest way to do that, and the sensible way, is to develop a standardised BIM protocol. I've seen that work in varying levels of success and detail across major frameworks. Nothing particularly brilliant at the moment, but the best one I have seen are those who are prescribing BIM execution plan, which will lay out the areas such as design competency assessment, levels of approvals and dates for approvals, use of COBE, what's the platform going to be. So it's giving you, if you like, a standard information and structure protocol, basically like a BIM program to work through.
So you know, it's really not down form, it's a set of rules, if you like, in which we will engage and use BIM on this particular project. Who does what, when, how, where, with what data.
It's actually a bit like using a project execution plan. So it's how I...
So you need definition of that early in the project.
Yeah.
You do, and it really needs to start off right at the front end. One of the first things that should be happening through the pre-construction phase is the development of the BIM execution plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, how BIM aligning with the NEC? When Joseph rang a few weeks ago and asked us to have a look at putting this presentation together, we sort of leapt at it, because not only are we doing this today, we're actually doing the BIM e-learning module along with the NEC, because when you look at the parity with regards to how BIM, the ethos for the collaborative working alongside the NEC ethos have been working, there's such parity and alignment with that. It's amazing that they haven't sort of been linked in before. Where I think BIM is particularly helpful and can remove some of those remaining areas of confrontation within construction is you have a very visible output from BIM that can help certainly the client side of things to make their assessments. For example, if we're using 3D, 4D and 5D scheduling, then what we can see, as a project manager, you can literally see what the state of the build should be at any one time. You can literally then go and look out the window to see does that align with the BIM model. You can tell from the price of work done to date or a cost verification certificate coming through, does that align with what's showing out of the 5D schedules where the cost should be at any one point. So it's a very strong underpinning tool for helping the client side of it.
I can see during the construction phase as well, it helps the plan because they know exactly which parts of the building are where, when, and what they're working around.
Yeah, and particularly relevant for your side of it, and CDM as well.
What was 7D, sorry?
7D, I've never got that. That's the golden fruit in the corner, because when we're getting on to the final I've not seen one in operation yet at all. It may be so in some of the major healthcare schemes, but I've not actually had experience with that. But you could see that when you get on to 7D, when you're bringing the FM facility into it, as managing a whole operational regime, probably because it's probably quite expensive to do that at the moment. It's convincing clients to have that investment up front to
Do clients know what assets they have, where, in what condition, in what state, and what needs to be done? There is some serious investment that needs to be carried out by clients, I would suggest, to actually understand their asset base.
I suspect probably the stronger case studies from that are probably outside of the UK.
Yeah.
As I've already said, how BIM aligns with the NEC. It gives a very visual output as to allowing certainly the client team, which I've sit alongside major contractors, civil engineering contractors, helping client teams visualise things like the works information and scope. These are people on the client side who aren't trained to interpret and understand architectural drawings, so for them it's particularly valuable on that. PM assessments, I've already said, can be underpinned by the 4D and 5D, allowing the project manager, if you like, confidence that there's integrity in the contractor's information coming through, is completely comfortable to make that payment. And compensation events, which can be built before acceptance. So if you have the time to consider whilst we're on site, shall we do this other extension work or not?
What will it look like? How do we build it? How does it cost?
you know, see the service and the access implications to having that compensation event put on board. So it can be extremely valuable.
So that's huge benefit then, really, isn't it? So BIM isn't this one-off thing that happens that replaces the guy with the pencil and ruler and you know, the drawing. Actually, it's a living, breathing process that will help not only create the right outcome, but help us manage the job as it.
Yes, but you need to know what it is you're trying to do. What you're trying to do, the right product in place.
But certainly for clients, actually, you know, visualising is much easier than reading words and interpreting those. So.
For a standard layperson, accountant like myself, it's extremely useful.
And then ultimately, in the world of CDM,
in my experience, for public inquiry, taking a model of the A3 Hindhead tunnel to the public, it showed them what the tunnel would be 3-4 years before construction started. And it was just so much easier to describe what it is, show a picture of it, and drive through. And that is what the solution is.
Fantastic. And the next question will be, we'll come to shortly on CDM, but can this be safely built? Can this be safely maintained?
Indeed,
because it different.
It helps with the visualization. You can see what constraints are, what you're working around. It's much easier to plan.
Okay, brilliant.
And then finally, applicable to service contracts also for operational functionality, so allowing things like FM and estate teams, and even things like if you're looking at educational or clinical staff, realising how they can move around the model, what could be points of pressure as regards classroom doors opposite each other, would create a bottleneck in the corridor, cleaning teams saying, well, that won't work. And allowing that upfront visibility, basically, of what the scheme's going to look like at the end before they actually get to it and get that horrible feeling of disappointment. This isn't actually what we were expecting to be getting.
So the users can actually input to a design rather than waiting for a finished product that they don't like.
So no, thank you. A bit late then.
Yes.
I've put this phrase in here, soft benefits, because it is a soft benefit as such. But to me, one of the biggest parities with NEC and BIM is that they are both very strongly promoting the collaborative working behaviour set. You won't have successful BIM working across any scheme unless you embrace collaborative working, much the same as NEC contracts. So there is real alignment, in my view, as regards making the design teams and client teams really work together to find out what's the best solution. Okay, do we need to go back and do more value engineering on that? But it's having that rather than working in silos. It will only be truly successful by that collaborative approach and working together as this one team.
That strikes me, the sort of direction of travel of using NEC contracts, the direction of travel of BIM and of CDM is about collaboration, isn't it?
Definitely.
You know, working together, getting the best out of each other.
Yeah, definitely. Just to give you a couple of pretty examples on here, when I talked about work information and scope being visualised into a 3D model, here's a good example of obviously the picture on the left is the BIM model imported into the existing operations room. I think this is a CT or MRI scanner, allowing the clinical staff will be able to see how they can move around the room on this basis, and you can then see how that transcribed into the finished model. So I think a very clean example there of showing how that could be transgressed.
So I'm the surgeon at this point.
You are.
I'm walking around saying, you know, that's wrong, it should be over that side, or I need this here, or there's not enough
if you're standing there doing that, how do I get past to do?
But on a flat drawing, that's just not possible. Unless, and we are moving on from now doing the full-size room mock-ups, which still have their place. But from full-size room model, something like that is extremely expensive compared to running through a model like that immediately the people actually using the facility at the end can see, is this viable, is this workable?
Would it even have the correct levels of perhaps lighting or something?
It will do, yeah. It'll pull the whole specification in on there as regards, you know, they will.
So you can actually say this is sufficient.
It will, and it'll pull in things like for healthcare schemes, the HBN, you know, specifications as regards what's required for a certain function. So it'll import those standards as well into the common data platform.
Yeah, so I was at this point, where on earth has this been then? Why hasn't this happened? Why hasn't this happened?
Well,
don't answer that one.
And once you have this modelling, when you're looking for the next upgrade, a new piece of kit, you can introduce that into the model, can you? And you go through the process again of how do you work around it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm making it sound very quick, but I think what I'm trying to demonstrate is the fact that the end result is extremely viable.
Yeah.
I've mentioned previously that PM payment assessments and program acceptance can be underpinned by 4D and 5D models, so you can essentially pick a time within the BIM model as regards where should construction, say, be in 22 weeks' time, and that will throw up the model of where it should be.
Yeah.
So you could literally then, we are at 22 weeks, I could look out the window, the costs, etc., should be the same as well. From that as well, you can extract such items such as a bill of quants as well to sort of test, particularly helpful as regards then building up list of components and assets to be maintained as well. CEs, compensation events, can also be built before acceptance, showing impact on the programme. So you can assess, well, should we want to move that over there? What's it going to look like? What's the impact going to be on maybe things like access routes?
So we do proposed instructions, if I actually do the following.
And from the contract
time cost quality implications.
Some of the contracts could also look at alternative sequences on the programme.
Yeah. They could
explore that.
And then operational functionality as well, supported by field data such as BIM 360, where the guys on site can actually go out with iPads with all the operational information loaded up. Particularly helpful, again, on the NEC line a bit, Rob, is the fact that they can do all defect snagging by dropping pinpoints on the regards detected a snag, pick that up, then can go back and demonstrate to the client that that defect's been actually rectified and managed out, making less issue on handover as well. So I think that's particularly bad. And I think that's where a big push is coming in now, is that there is some certain push in some of the big construction fields that are bringing this skill back in, and I can see there being huge benefits to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. We talked about the heading today being designer interacting with the BIM process, and my view is that designer isn't just the architect, it's actually the whole design team, from the building services engineers through to the mechanical engineers to the FM team, estates team, as regards to who should be involved at the process for actually developing and feeding the information to form the design to come out of the BIM process. ECI, in my view, should be promoted, because the earlier you have all of that supply chain and end user input within the BIM design, the better and more integrity that design is going to be. Again, that proves much more collaborative working as well by involving everybody at the earliest opportunity. It's still a sticking point with a lot of clients, because nobody likes to have that very much upfront cost burden of having all those people engaged. There's a key element to all that. And with contractors, either construction or civil engineering, forging ahead on BIM, it's actually the client team who are sadly lacking behind, sort of need to be convinced and brought forward that this is going to save a lot of cost. You will get more of what you want if you engage in this process and just have that up front. And I see that as being quite a tough battle. Certain sectors such as rail have very much embraced it, because they're going down the BS 11009 anyway. But I think it's still, you're very much stuck within certain things like health trusts or education trusts that are very wary of, oh, it looks expensive, it's new.
And is it, what about the occasional client, the one-off client, if you like, he just pops into our industry every 10, 20, 30 years? Is it going to be prohibitive in terms of expense, or? No,
I mean, the payback, unfortunately, the cost is up front and the payback is later. People want to see the savings up front, but actually the input is all front-end loaded. And actually, if you then think of the very few changes to design, that will mean a much smoother construction run. And everything's finished a lot quicker and an accelerated program.
I mean, it's pretty obvious that I'm well aware of the sort of clash detection and avoidance, and what I say in lots of jobs is sorting a mess out, because you have that clashes all over the place. And I'm aware that BIM is far, far more than that. But if you think that, surely in itself would just pay for
the clash detection is, if you like, is really the buildability, very first phase brass tacks. To me, the biggest value in some of this is actually stopping the client changing the design, because you can achieve design freeze a lot quicker. So the majority of design changes come with the client coming along saying, I don't like that door over there, I don't like that window over there. Whereas if you've got that agreed up front, you are there's very little interruption on your building programme.
In my little head, I've got now a BIM thing coming up with the design. Until the press a button, it goes up to the 3D printer, and it's attached to a drone, and it's delivered to us very quickly. I might talk about that, because there's a business line.
I think it's a few years off yet, but it's nice to have a plan.
We then sort of get into very sticky subjects of quality. And that's why we talked about the if you like, BIM protocol and the BIM execution plan very early on in my slides. Within that BIM execution plan is the design competency assessment as regards who's got the relevant training and qualifications and the right common data platforms to be able to actually engage in BIM. So it's not one of those, I'll agree to the job and I'll go back and Google it as to how I can do it. You've got to pass that formal assessment, and that's a formal part of making sure then that it's part of the GSL quality assurance process of making sure that's okay. And I think it's just extremely valuable, as I've said, is working as part of a wider design and client team to achieve the early robust design trees. Bringing the client.
That's the goal, isn't it?
It is, I think, and I think that's where the savings and the engagement will come from.
Okay. Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
CDM?
Indeed. CDM, we've mentioned it several times, but what is CDM? Give you its full title. It's the Construction, Design and Management Regulations 2015. That's a new version. We've had the 2007 and we had the 94 version before that. It's evolved. Why CDM? It's basically about health and safety. That's some steel erectors out in New York back at the turn of the previous century, the later probably 1920s. They seem happy enough there, having their lunch, sitting on a girder.
Been 3D models, isn't it?
Yeah. They seem happy. Would we be happy now? I don't think so. What do people think? It changes. It wouldn't be acceptable anymore. It isn't acceptable. And what's not acceptable, it gets put into laws because it's not acceptable to people, but we don't want people to carry on doing it, so it gets changed. Regulations, yep, the CDM regulations are precisely that, and they are law. Of note, they're empowered under the Health and Safety at Work Act, and that makes them criminal law. It's not just a case of you get your hand slapped and you pay a fine. There's custodial sentences for the guilty parties. So it is to be taken seriously. In the UK, last year, 2014-15, 35 fatal injuries in construction. That's just in construction in the UK. That's lower than the average over the past 5 years, but it's still far too many.
You might get heartened by the 22% lower, but that's 35 too many. That in this day and age is utterly unacceptable. But for a freak sort of accident, which might be okay, that's just utterly unacceptable.
It is. We've had CDM since '94, then 2007, and there have been improvements, but we're still at 35 injuries, fatal injuries.
What behind those 35? Is there sort of reasoning? Do we understand why these things occur? Is it people? Is it processes? Is it unlucky? Is it lack of training?
Oh, it's always unlucky because there's so many more near misses where it's oh, that was close, but most people get away with it. But primarily it's height and people and machinery.
Height, people, machinery.
People don't fall well. Things don't fall well on people. People don't interact well with machines if they're trying to occupy the same space.
And if we have these regulations, say in the UK, we think we're fairly good at it, and that's utterly unacceptable to me, other countries must be in a dire mess, and I would suggest. Some of the developing countries.
Developing countries, yes. There's a lot of cheaper labour. There's not the same concentration on health and safety. There are a lot more injuries, a lot more fatalities, and it spoils people's lives.
Yeah.
In Europe, there's a general consistent standard because the CDM regs have been driven by a European directive. In fact, it's that European directive that's caused the need for a 2015 revision, because a major non-alignment in the 2007 regs was that we'd exempted domestic clients from any responsibilities. That didn't comply with the European directive, so we had to make a change to it.
And the good news for those of you in the webinar, I'm not going to ask you if you want to stay in or out of the European just now, but obviously it's space.
So that's what's prompted the change of the 2015 to bring that in, but there have been other changes. Notably, there's now more duties on the client. They take more responsibility, which is right, because under contract, the client starts it, the client initiates the design, the client initiates construction. They choose what they want and how it's delivered. So they should have some responsibility. Another major change is the CDM coordinator role has been dispensed with, and now there's a principal designer role, which means that one of the designers has to take the lead in making sure that all the design components fit together. It's a complete design.
That's a step right up there. I mean, maybe just my opinion, but what I've seen in the past is people view this as perhaps a source of fee income, which I think is absolutely tragic. So the role itself is so important. If there's a criminal proceeding potentially hanging off the back of it, it's not about fee income whatsoever. It's about making sure everybody goes home at night. And
I don't like to focus on the criminal, because that's when things have gone wrong. What it should be is focusing on the collaborative working to make it safer, to drive down injuries, to stop it happening. I wouldn't want to be responsible for hurting someone. The punishment, if you do, that's bad, but I don't even want to be responsible for it.
No.
Construction. In the regulations it is defined, and it's pretty much anything that changes the ground, put something permanent on the ground, put something temporary on the ground. If you dig a hole, if you change the shape of the ground, it's construction. It's not just buildings. It's pretty much anything you can do with a civil engineering contractor or structural contractor. M&E. It includes maintenance works. If you're taking things down, putting new things in, unless it's literally an unplug one, plug in the identical one in, it's construction. It's far more wide-reaching, but the only things that don't come under construction are mineral extraction and mining, and the only reason they're exempt from CDM regs is they've got their own regs. They've got their own laws that constrain what they happen.
Are they comparable then? Like when you said that was a surprise, because I think that mining has to be the most dangerous thing.
Indeed, so they already had their own regs, and they were more onerous on the mining companies, so they were already covered on that. Some construction, obviously construction, pretty big project there down at Terminal 5. Other construction doesn't actually build anything. That's a percussion rig taking soil samples. It takes small samples out of the ground and test them, but that rig will be gone at the end of the day. There'll just be a little patch of earth disturbed, but nonetheless.
Still a potentially dangerous operation, isn't it? So it's still man and machinery, and generally machinery will win over.
In construction, it's one of our more dangerous activities. Ground workers do get killed, and they tend to be not lone working, but small teams out on temporary sites, and it is a problem.
In all weathers.
Yes. With a tight program usually. Design is everything that chooses what we're going to be providing. So Steph has mentioned it's not just the structural engineer, it's the architect as well, but it's M&E. It's everyone who chooses what we're providing and how we're going to provide it. So temporary works, sequencing of the works, that all comes down as design as well, and has to be considering the health and safety of the people who are delivering that and the people who come after. Designers required to identify hazards. In the new regs, they're prompted, you have to eliminate them or reduce them. That was a requirement previously, but a lot of designers would say, well, it's too hard to do that or too expensive to do that, but I'll just flag them up and the contractor can deal with it. But it's been focused now.
The tool on that, though, is allowing you to help design out by looking at the BIM model.
So you must be able to look at those potential conflicts and barriers and say, how actually we're going to work through this to avoid that dangerous thing.
As we mentioned earlier, it's a chance while you're developing the model, you can look at the sequence of how it's built, what's physically there, if you build it now, is it in the way for the next part of the process? If you want to put up props, does it get in the way?
It can help with things like fire strategies and all sorts, though, can't it, as regards to the field of CDM?
It's also about looking beyond just the building it safely, but maintaining it safely. And a client who I spoke to recently said, we actually have an asset where it is actually quite dangerous to clean it, to do basic coppering and the likes, because of all sorts of intricacies in it. It might look good, that looks good, doesn't it? But people are exposed to danger just in simple cleaning.
Yes, it is accepted in the regs that sometimes it won't be the safest possible design, but you need to have an argument for why. Many architects don't like balustrading, don't like parapets on buildings. They like a nice clean edge to the building, so that it gives a statement, and that's part of the design. But they've got to be very.
Put pen to paper to say.
They've got to be very comfortable with what they're asking people to do.
My aesthetics supersedes life and limbs of others.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Most effort has to go to the most risky activities where most harm is likely to happen. That's, in construction, that tends to be things falling, people getting squashed by machinery. So you need to concentrate on that. In my own line on highways, you've got to think very carefully about where the traffic is, how close to the work, and what you're going to do to try and keep the two separate. Most effort where the harm will come. In theory, you should consider all hazards, all risks, but some are so improbable that you have to think about them, but you probably won't be very long before you dismiss them as, well, there's not what you could do to stop that. Whereas there are other hazards that really do have potential to hurt, and that's the ones to concentrate on. So it should be proportional, the effort. Design and management. Management's important. It requires not just design, management. Management of information, management of other designers. The new role of principal designer takes the lead in that management. BIM is useful for exchange of information, keeping track of what is the current information. It's very important to document control, information control. If you've got a group of designers working around the world on the same project, it's very easy to get 3 working on one level of information, 2 are working on the previous generation, and 1's back on the generation beyond that. They're all going off producing their designs. If it's done as separate designs, it just doesn't fit together. If we can integrate that, it's much more powerful, saves a lot of conflict when you get to site, and it makes it safer.
And there's a good fit, of course, with NEC sort of processes here. Communications and information to be read, coupled and recorded. Keep on top of your works information and scope. People need to know what they're doing at any one time. No verbal instructions, no confirmation of verbal instructions. Have a program. Tell me what it is you're going to do with what resource in what sequence.
Manage,
on top of that.
Manage that program with the contractor.
All of it is about just management. As simple as you can make it, but simple, effective management to communicate what you want, when, and the contractor to in turn, through his program or the consultant advise what resources.
Simple it may be, but it so often doesn't happen. And we need to be encouraging it. And facilitating it, making it easier, making it more effective. CDM has introduced the statutory role of principal designer. They have to take a lead in the coordination, making sure that information is current, is correct, is appropriate.
So that was the CDM coordinator. He's now gone.
CDM coordinator's gone. The problem used to be that the designer had to design out hazards and had to run the design, but the CDM coordinator also had to ensure the designer was doing that, and so did the client. And with 3 people responsible for it, everyone said, well, it's over to them. I've done my bit, but it's over to you, and it went wrong because of you. Now it's a lot more focused, one party responsible for one thing.
I've seen that in the past, other than design people fancy their chances as acting as CDM coordinator, and I wasn't unsure and uncertain about that, to say the least. But do you think now, the principal designer, is there a clue there? Do you think that only a designer can act as a principal designer?
It is a requirement in the regulations. The principal designer must be a designer.
Okay, so that kills all the non-designers.
Doesn't have to be a designer on that specific project, but they have to be a designer who understands the design. Whereas a CDM coordinator could be a project manager, could be a quantity surveyor, could be anything.
It might. That's really important. It is. If you have the right person actually at the helm of the particular ship.
Yes. In my mind, it's probably best if it's the company or the individual who's got the greatest control on the design. Often there's a lead designer appointed specifically as a technical lead designer who coordinates all the other elements of design coming in to produce a coordinated design, and that fits in well with the lead designer role. So rather than the technical coordination, it's the health and safety coordination.
Okay. Can I just ask, is that an individual appointment or a corporate appointment, contact Fred Box?
That can be either. It depends on the size of the scheme, nature of the project. You've got the freedom to appoint whatever's most suitable.
Okay.
One person wouldn't do it for the equivalent of T5 at Heathrow, whereas for a small household extension, you wouldn't really want a team of 20 in.
Yeah. Okay.
Formal contract used defines roles. Also, it allocates ownership of risk, because risk management is important in the design. You put the incentive on the designer to manage what they can. Then when it goes to construction, the contractor manages risk. Some risk stays with the client, so they can better manage that. It's using the contract to get it to the appropriate people.
Good in theory, but the word must, I don't think that actually applies in practice. What I see is literally that. Risk dumping exercise.
That's possibly opinion there. My opinion is it must allocate.
Sure. Ideally.
Yes.
Ideally, yeah.
Yes. Over the life of the contract, risk profiles change and control changes. Particular example of that is design and build contract. You showed the model on one of your earlier stages, earlier slides. Design and build tends to be that the client goes to a designer, will do preliminary stages, establish, is there a scheme? Have I got something that's viable? Do I actually want it? Then you go to the contractor, get competitive tenders, they come in, and then they appoint their designers to develop a design they actually want to build. It'll have to comply with the works information, but there's a lot of control there. Interesting that you can have different people as principal designer, depending on quite how you're going to manage it. It can be allocated to the principal contractor and their designer. A shortcoming with that is that tends to focus on the construction risk and less so on the maintenance cost and maintenance risk. If you keep it with the client and the client's advisor, they tend to focus more on the ongoing maintenance of the operation and a little bit less concerned about the actual cost of building it. So
no right or wrong, but there's pros and cons associated.
Causes friction either way, and it's how to manage that. Depending on the project, depending on the people, that's one that you've got to get on top of.
A variant I say, I call it design and dump, D&D, where some poor soul designs and right at the end it's dumped upon some poor unsuspecting contractor.
Yes.
Hopefully this would eradicate that sort of nonsense.
It's going to be tough to handle on very multi-discipline schemes, so isn't it? I've just got my mind thinking of something like HS2, where you've got rail, crossing highways, crossing all sorts of different sectors. So that's going to take some. You'll be busy.
That's going to take major coordination. That will take a lot of coordination.
Yeah. I was going to say 8 minutes of my journey from Birmingham, I believe.
Well, there you go.
But there's so much to play for, because by coordinating it, it can make the construction efficient. That's in time and money, and safer.
Yeah.
And to me, the safer is very, very important.
Why wouldn't you want that? How can any organisation afford the fallout of a catastrophic event? You can't recover from that.
No, you're not get past the PQQ stage.
It has been said, if you can't afford health and safety, you can't afford an accident.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's where the management comes into it. Manage health and safety in design requires sharing of knowledge. We've covered that. Logical data handling system, the way of layering data. Important for knowledge sharing is not just how you put the information in, it's how you get the information out. If you've no data, you have a big problem. You don't know what's there. You've got to go and do surveys again. You've got to find it. But no data, one problem. Room full of data. If you can't find the piece of paper you want, the item of information you want, if it's electronic, you may as well not have it. You're not going to spend 2 years looking for that one piece that could save you 10 minutes. You'll make it up and hope for the best. CDM places more responsibility on the client. That's because they've got the control. They produce the contract, they sign the contract, they procure the design, they procure the contractors. They are the person in control. Their experts, their advisors need to advise them, but we're getting more intelligent clients now, knowledgeable clients, and we need to work with them.
Particularly in highways.
And that's where we need to be collaborative.
Okay, that's brilliant, thank you. I could spend the rest of the day with you guys, but alas, people have finished their lunches, they've got work to do, so thanks, Mark. Glasses. So let's have a look at what questions that we've had in. in the meantime. First one. So I think in the past people have said, can't we share the questions? And maybe we could. Some of the questions are not particularly legible, and perhaps the grammar isn't brilliant. So we put them up on the screen, and I'll sort of edit that, you know, from those available. So the first one is: if the designer is to eliminate the most likely risk to cause harm, does this mean a pre-design risk assessment must be carried out?
I would argue that rather than a pre-design risk assessment, if you're talking of the construction risks and the operation and maintenance, it's an ongoing process through the design. So as part, you start off with a data collection of what is the problem, what are you trying to fix, you're about to build something, it has to have a reason to drive it. That will identify hazards in itself. If it's an existing building that you're doing an alteration, you're developing a brief of what is it you're wanting to do, that has them. You start with a pre-design, and then as the design progresses, you'd be revisiting that, making changes to the design, keeping it in mind, so that you end up with a design that's got the lowest overall basket of risk, lowest probability of hurting someone.
Yeah. Okay, next question for Steph about BIM. Should BIM owner during design and construction stage be the principal designer?
Interesting one. There's no standard for it. How I've seen this in practice is during some of the major construction schemes, particularly on BIM execution planners, the owner tends to be very much now aligned to the government soft landings champion, so they're like one and the same person. So managing that whole through, it becomes more of a coordination that you are being compliant with the BIM protocol and BIM execution plan. So BIM is more, if you like, of a process to actually getting things done rather than the getting involved in the principal design stage, because I think it's, if you've got a principal designer who may be the architect, but it's actually these specialisms from M&E and building services engineers, it actually needs, I think, that overall central facilitator role to be sat outside of that, if you like, key design ownership role.
Yeah.
So in my experience, what I've seen at the moment on BIM execution plans is very much the BIM local champion, probably design manager anyway, is being the government soft landings and the BIM champion on the same scheme.
It rather depends whether the BIM owner is also the controlling mind of the design, or whether it's somebody providing support service to them, because the principal designer really needs to be the controlling mind, that organisation, of what the design actually is.
Yeah.
It's usually, from my experience, it's usually coming out as being the construction design manager, or senior design manager is being the BIM owner.
Okay, a question from a guy working for a local authority in Scotland, trying to implement BIM within their authority. The question is it being BIM still required on all projects with 5 million plus fees by 2016?
I don't know, because I don't know if there's anything different in Scotland, but what I will say is that I'll find out and pass that back to Joseph to pass on.
Very good. So maybe 50-50, wasn't it? So a yes or a no, that one, so I'm not sure. Okay, you mentioned the most likely risk should be designed out. What about the more severe hazards? Where do these fit into?
Okay, well, this partly comes on terminology, because a hazard is anything that can do harm, and then you have the probability of it happening that gives you the risk level. So if you, by severe hazards, you mean those with the most severe risk level, then yes, those are in effect the ones that are most likely to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
They're either less likely to happen, but going to hurt people very badly, or will happen much more often and hurt people less severe. But either way, those are the ones you should be concentrating on, rather than the ones which could hurt somebody a little bit, but probably won't, or could even kill someone, but it's a 1 in 50 million year probability.
That's just common sense, isn't it, really?
It is, really.
Put whatever scientific application you want to it, but it's common sense.
But most people put an assessment on it of what is the scale of damage that could occur, and then what's the likelihood of it, and then compound those two together to come up with the ones that there'd be most benefit in reducing them.
Yeah. Okay, and question for Steph probably. Do you think the greater adoption of BIM will lead to a move towards options B and D contracts rather than option A and C. And maybe that's interesting because I think on one of your slides it talks about you could use BIM, one of the outputs could be a bill of quantities.
Yeah,
so I bit my lip at that point when you said that, because I'm not the greatest fan of the world of bill of quantities.
No.
But that said, you know, that's one of the benefits.
That can help though in asset registers and component databases.
Yeah, my biggest problem with bills of quantities is that often we don't advance the design sufficiently in order for them to be prepared properly. Now, with the BIM,
target cost had its place.
Yeah, it does have its place, but maybe with BIM you can use because you're designing things in advance, you can use the model to create those. You
could, and I think there probably needs to be more time spent in that case up front on choosing the right contracting strategy.
Yeah.
Use the form to go through. I think there won't be a big migration over to options B and D simply because everyone's very much more comfortable with A and C.
Yeah.
So you've probably got more learning curve to adopt on that anyway.
Yeah, personally I like A, C and E, but that's
yeah, I agree.
But then you could use the fact that you get quantities, you don't have to use them in the form of bill quantities, you could use them as a basis for creating your target. There's no rules on saying how it is you have to create the target.
The example I was used for exactly that purpose.
Yeah.
It's useful for procurement in any case.
Yeah, so somebody somewhere at some point has to schedule things out, the buyer, the estimator, the planner, you know, use it for that function.
Establish the subcontracts?
Rather than determining the pricing mechanism.
Mm.
Okay, so can the principal contractor take on the role of principal designer? I think you sort of alluded to that.
There's a short answer and a slightly longer one to this. The short answer is yes, but the longer answer is, depending what the project is and what the contract is, it may or may not be appropriate. If the principal contractor has control over the design and is in best position to coordinate that design, then yes, it's wholly appropriate. If they're not in that position, then it wouldn't be appropriate.
So tell me, how does a lay client know that, what you just said? How would they know to question, to challenge, to create, you know, or appoint the right person on the basis of that?
A client is very dependent on their advisors, and there is a requirement in CDM that the first person on board, who would tend to be a designer, must brief the client, must let them know what their responsibilities are, and that's something to be explored at that early stage.
They must give that really useful, I can't think of the word, you know, independent, impartial advice at that point in time.
Yes, it's the same as how do you brief a lay client on which form of contract is most appropriate? Yeah. They have to appoint an expert and trust their experts.
Yeah, and have a judge against their expertise ultimately.
Oh, indeed. Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Do you think BIM will offer more advantages for different options?
Do you mean contract options, or are we talking talking option appraisal?
Well, this is an NEC day, so I assume it's options A, B, C, D, E, or F. So could we use it with a management contract? Could we use it with option E, cost reimbursement contract? I don't see a barrier personally.
No.
They're just payment things, aren't they?
They are. I mean, the biggest benefit BIM will give you is being able to really test the integrity of the design.
Not really about payment, is it? So,
it's not.
In fact, the creator of BIM, one person or another, I can't imagine them thinking payment mechanisms to contractor.
I think it will give, for either option of contract, I think what BIM will give you, if it's used properly and it's set up properly from the start, invoking early contractor and wider supply chain involvement, is it will give a much more smooth run through the contract mechanism.
Okay, so the answer, therefore, more advantages. So the answer's got to be yes, hasn't it?
Yes, so less delay.
But turn that round into a statement rather than a question. Despite or in spite of the chosen payment method, A, B, C, D, E, or F with ECC, doesn't really matter. BIM will offer you a greater advantage. You would hopefully get
a reduction in things like early warnings, apart from, say, ground conditions that you would come across that couldn't be foreseen from something like using a BIM. But I think it will give a smoother application for any option of the contract.
Okay. I was thinking this next question, but didn't dare ask, so this is me and my DIY. How does CDM work in small domestic projects, only all being not secured?
That's a very interesting question, because CDM applies to all construction work, and knocking through a wall in a house, that's construction work. You are changing the fabric of the house. It's
still construction.
It always has applied. It used to be that the domestic client was exempt from their duties. Now they're not. That's one of the big changes in 2015. The government have been gentle, or HSE have been gentle though to the domestic clients, as whilst they're still responsible, they have to be under the European directive. The advisors, the first appointments they make to a designer, to a contractor, they are expected under the regulations to guide the client and be the client's advisors. So the domestic client has ultimate responsibility but can rely on professional guidance from their builder.
So where you don't use a builder, where you are DIY, where you are designer, builder, buyer, doer,
yes, that's
team maker.
That's an interesting one.
Can you fall foul of that?
I think you probably can. Okay. I don't think there haven't been any instances of it yet, but I said about the fatalities in the UK in construction. Many of those are in the smaller companies, small subcontractors, contractors doing house refurbishment, relatively minor works.
But not the Mr. and Mrs. Smith doing their own.
No, not down to that level. Okay. But a contractor is somebody carrying out work.
Okay. Couple more questions.
The social housing contracts.
One more, I'm being told. If you're online. Yes. So, does NEC align with green buildings? Who knows what a green building is? Just say yes or no.
No.
No. Okay, let's do a different one. Earlier on, different stages of BIM were discussed, from 3D through to 7D. Can hazards and risks identified in the health and safety risk assessment be incorporated into any of these stages? They must be, mustn't they?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the primary use of the.
Why would you not use the opportunity to do exactly that?
Indeed. You can tag up information on products, you can tag up hazards, you can put in method statements on how things were built, how things were maintained last time. You can have as much information as you want attached into the model so that it's there to interrogate. The challenge is prioritising it so that you can find what you want quickly, and the things that are important that you need to know stand out.
And it's not just through the construction stage either, it's the post-construction as regards how safely and easily the building will be occupied and used.
Mm.
Okay, brilliant. I'll just reach that back if I might. So on the questions, if you've got any more, please do fire them in and we'll do our best to answer those. So the one like the green buildings, if you can excuse my ignorance, tell us a little bit more about that, we'll do our best to answer it. Thank you very much indeed for all your questions asked and the answers given. A few more things to close in a couple of minutes we've got. Just to note, there is a CDM 2015 suite of training, so have a look at the ICE training on this website at the bottom of the screen. There's still really something better than hats we can promote, isn't there, on these things, but never mind. So, ICE and BIM 2015 at the 21st of October are realising the promise of BIM, so have a look at that event and please do consider attending that. More hats, more hard hats on this one. So, lessons learned. Our next webinar, this is quite interesting. I'm going to welcome Patrick Waterhouse to this, who I think he's agreed, I think we've told him, I'm not sure, I think he's volunteered. But anyway, lessons learned on NEC from adjudication. So, adjudication is quite a private thing, isn't it? And I'm sure there's lots of good data that exists in adjudication that we just never hear why there are disputes or what the outcomes are. So we're going to invite Patrick in, who's a very accomplished adjudicator, and he can do all those things on that screen there for us. So when is that? 24th of November, same time, same place, wherever you are in the world. Do have a look at that and book your place soonest. Final plug, as always, with that fantastic bridge is, if you're not already members of the NEC Users Group, please do consider joining it. Come to the events that we have, workshops, annual seminar. Use the helpline. All the questions that you put forward today, we have an NEC Users Group helpline. So you can fire any questions at any time, ask about any NEC contracts that you so wish to. Time is closing rapidly, so anything else you want to find out on NEC, look at the website, neccontract.com, ring that number, email that address, That's it. That just leaves me to thank you guys very much indeed.
Thank you
for the past hour, and thank you all for attending. See you again soon. Bye.
Thank you.